Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second to last week of Great Decisions 2025. It seems as if we finally got all the technical bugs worked out. I know you've heard me say that before, but hopefully this time I mean it. Only time will tell. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We have a great lecture to look forward to, and I just wanted to, as always, thank our fantastic sponsors for the Great Decisions Lecture Series. There is, of course, the League of Women Voters of Manitowoc County, the Manitowoc Public Library Foundation, the Manitowoc Public Library, and the Lakeshore Unitarian Universalist Fellowship. So a big round of applause for our sponsors. As always, we would love to not have to lean on our sponsors to make this lecture series happen. So if you're interested in donating to the Great Decisions Legacy Fund, last time I'll bring it up this year, I promise. I won't bring it up next week. Just grab one of these brochures. All the information you need is in the back of the brochure. Before I turn it over to our speaker tonight, I just want to bring up one other program that we have coming up at the library. Next Thursday, Manitowoc Public Library, in partnership with Manitowoc County Historical Society, will be doing a program called The Flag of Company A. And it is a reenactment of the 100-year anniversary of the Civil War flag that was made for our troops that went from Manitowoc to fight in the Civil War, that was made for them. It's 100 years, almost to the day, since the flag made its way back to Manitowoc and it was presented to the Manitowoc County Historical Society. So there's going to be a reenactment of turning the flag over to the County Historical Society. That happens on Thursday, March 27th at 6 p.m. downstairs in the atrium space right next to the main desk where the evergreen trees are on display in winter. That's where it's going to be happening. So, enough of my yammering. Let me introduce our speaker for the evening. Amitabh Pal has spent decades in the journalism and education fields. He currently is the communications director for a nonprofit focused on secular issues, teaches political science courses at Edgewood College in Madison, Wisconsin, and co-hosts a global affairs show on Madison's community radio station, listener-sponsored WORT 89.9 FM. He was for many years the managing editor of the Progressive magazine, a national publication founded by Wisconsin Governor Robert La Follette in 1909. So, without further ado, Amitabh Pal.
Thank you so much, Tim. Is my volume level okay? Yep. Tim, wonderful. So I'm so appreciative that you all are having me over to speak on this important issue. These are very uncertain times, I need not tell you. Since we are focusing partly on China, I've heard it's probably apocryphal that it isn't a Chinese saying, but they say that the Chinese have the saying, "May we live in interesting times," and which may or may not be true, actually. But let's take it that they do, and we certainly are. So I'd like to start on that note. India is now the largest, the most populous nation in the world, overtaking none other than China just recently. Now, the reason is that the Chinese population is declining. The Indian population is still growing, but much more slowly than it was even a few years ago. So the average number of children per family in India is just 2.1. But in China, it actually is below replacement rate, and that's why their population is falling. As importantly, if not more, forever, since 1947, India has been the largest democracy in the world. imperfectly so maybe, we'll get to that, in recent years especially. There's a large Indian diaspora in this country. We were talking about it at dinner. Famous names and people like Kash Patel and Vivek Ramaswamy, and then maybe people just in your community, ordinary folks, doctors, engineers, cab drivers in bigger cities. And the population now of Indian Americans is 5 million or so in this country, and rapidly growing. So it helps to understand India better, the land of Indian Americans better, because, as I said, it's such a key country in the global south, which is a term I love and which has replaced this notion of the third world, which is a much earlier notion that was coined in the 1950s by a French sociologist, initially not disparaging, but over time has come to acquire a negative, derisive kind of connotation. That's so third world. You see what I'm saying? And so that's unfortunate. And so I even tell my students, please don't use that term. Now it's the global south. Although, as a friend was teasing me, what about Australia and New Zealand? They're in the south. So it's imperfect, but let's stick with that. So it's India between China, the West, and the global south. So let's start with that Chinese quotation and this man, who is the most influential man in India's independent history. You're like, who's he? You probably know of this person a bit more because of the movie that came out many years ago, and he's globally more famous. He had an impact on, of course, on Martin Luther King, on Cesar Chavez, and that's none other than Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, better known as the Mahatma, or great soul Gandhi. The reason he's had less of an impact in some sense on independent India, especially its foreign policy, is twofold. One is that he wrote a lot, but his writings and thinkings on foreign policy were just a small fraction of what he wrote and thought about. Number two, they were on the abstract level. The person we'll be talking about gave them a real, concrete form in his own way, although he was Gandhi's main protege, but he took things in his own direction. The other reason that Gandhi had little impact on independent India rather than the independence movement was that he was unfortunately assassinated. Let's do the math. India became independent in August 1947. I'm not making this up. September, October, November, December, January. Within 5 months, he was killed. Yeah. So obviously, he wouldn't have very much of an impact on the direction that India went in, except indirectly through this man. And we'll get to his assassination in a bit, because it has bearing on who leads India right now, which is disconcerting. He is none other than Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru was Gandhi's protege, his favorite, was India's prime minister and leader for 17 long years. So even longer than FDR was the president of this country, who, as we know, he was the longest serving president. India doesn't have term limits, neither it did then nor now. And the current prime minister may actually be of longer duration if he sticks on for a few more years. And we'll talk about him much more. Nehru had 4 planks or 4 foundations that he gave India: democracy, socialism, mild Fabian socialism imported from England, secularism, the Indian variety, which is that equal respect for all religions. One religion will not be the state religion. So it was not the United States variant, which is that the state shall have no interference in religion. It was more that the state shall have equal respect for all religions, which is somewhat different. And it worked well till recently. We'll get to that. And the fourth one, which we'll be focusing on for this talk, is the notion of as you can see, the book's title, it's a very recent book, which I'll have to buy now that I'm showing the cover image to you all and appropriating that. I have to purchase it as a kind of a recompense to the author. An International History of Indian Non-Alignment. So what was this non-alignment notion? Non-alignment notion grew up in the global south after they got decolonized, they got independence. They ruled by colonial masters, especially Britain and France. Latin America was different. The cycle was different, of course. The Portuguese and the Spaniards left much earlier. But in Africa and Asia, it was mainly the French and the British, but others too, the Belgians in the Congo, for example, the Dutch in Indonesia. So once they all left and started departing, India, even I used to think, was the first non-white country to be granted independence. But actually it wasn't. A year earlier, another country was. Can any of you guess which one was that? We all should know. It was us who gave them independence. Come on, people. The Philippines. Yeah, isn't it interesting? July 4th, 1946. Yes, that's not a coincidence. It was chosen on purpose, that date. But the United States, you know what I'm saying, that was kind of a standalone event in some sense. It did not initiate the decolonization process. For India, the decolonization process was initiated, the global south, in 1947 with the independence of India and Pakistan. So they both came into being the same midnight. Pakistan chose August 14th, 1947. India chose August 15th, 1947. It was the partition, I don't want to get too much into that, of India into India, Pakistan, and we'll get to the creation of Bangladesh in just a bit. But first India, and then other countries in Asia. Africa, Ghana is the first country to get independence. All of these countries throughout Asia and Africa thought that we need to stay clear of superpower rivalry. We cannot afford to get enmeshed in that. What we need is economic development. And we are being left impoverished. We have been left basically completely ruined socioeconomically. And we can't afford to get into, even as a camp follower of one of the superpowers, into a ruinous arms race and military spending. So, along with India, another country that got independence just shortly later was the country headed by this gentleman right over here, the number 4 in the picture. His name was Sukarno. Sukarno was the leader of Indonesia, which was a Dutch colony and got independence in 1948. He held a conference in 1955, which I tell my students in international relations, to me, is a conference, a gathering of 29 countries that to me is even more important than the conferences that Yalta and Potsdam that ended World War II. Because this was the start of the consciousness of the global south as being one. And this was Bandung in Indonesia. If I ever get a chance, I would so much love to visit that city. It's a huge city in Indonesia. So you can see the leaders in the right photo: Nehru from India, Nkrumah from Ghana, Nasser from Egypt, Sukarno, who was the host, from Indonesia, and Tito, this is so fascinating, from a European country, Yugoslavia. So even though he was communist, he was independent communist. He was not aligned with the Soviet Union, and so became part of the non-aligned movement and part of the global south, even though it was a European country. Of course, that doesn't exist now. So he was there at the founding. From this grew the non-aligned movement. The first meeting was held in Yugoslavia itself in 1961. So that whole consciousness of the global south being together, and India being part of that, and so not a camp follower of either the United States or the Soviet Union. That consciousness has existed ever since then. A vital partner in that whole project, that global south project, was China. Now, there was a lot of sympathy in India for China, even Mao's China, because they suffered so badly in World War II. And Nehru had sympathy for the notion of social justice and land reform and all of those things that China was undertaking, even though he was not in sympathy with the methods. And if you talk to Indians, they say he had too much of romanticization and too much of sympathy, maybe. I don't think that's true. That kind of warm relationship only lasted maybe 5 or 7 or 8 or 10 years, and not beyond that. Late 1950s onward, and we'll get to the border clashes in recent times in just a bit, disputes started arising over the border. And India and China have 3 sections where they are neighbors of each other. And in all 3 segments, these disputes started arising as to who is entitled to what portion of the territory. What complicated this, and I have had the privilege of interviewing him, is that much of the border with India, if not nearly all, is Tibet, headed by the Dalai Lama. Now, of course, China annexed Tibet in the early 1950s. The Dalai Lama had to flee to India, which is where I interviewed him some years ago. And after that, those disputes became intensified. As a result, in 1962, there was a war between India and China. I cannot tell you how much that war has scarred the Indian psyche. I mean, everybody in India thinks that the reality is much more complicated. And let me jump ahead a bit and show you this book, which actually has a very good history of the India-China relations. You can see on the book cover. I would recommend it if somebody wants to learn more. Protracted Contest is Nehru and Mao are sitting there, kind of in a weird kind of collage-ish way. And as that points out, it was complicated, that India was in good portion to blame for the conflict too. That's not the way they see it in India. The way they see it is we were such followers of Gandhi, and we were trying to get this resolved peacefully, and China came and attacked us, and it was a rout. It was just completely one-sided. They took huge number of Indian prisoners, for example. India could not even have one Chinese as a prisoner of war. It was that one-sided. It was up in the mountains. The Chinese, of course, had an advantage. Indians didn't even have the requisite clothing and equipment. So it was a big rout, and as I said, the reality may be different, but Indians feel that they were taken advantage of, their Gandhian ways were exploited by the Chinese, who attacked without provocation. Again, not true. But as I write, basically perception and reality are very different. And that's why since then there's been deep, deep suspicion of China. And we'll get just in a bit to what happened since then. Can you believe it? It took till 1988 for normal diplomatic relations. So 25 years almost for them to have ambassadors in each other's country. 2000 till 2000, there wasn't a single direct flight between India and China, the 2 most populated countries in the world. You had to go via Hong Kong. Yes, you can. So Hong Kong is sort of China, sort of not. but you can't. There's no New Delhi Beijing flight. And I say this in the present tense. 2000 to 2020 there was. Then the pandemic happens, and relations plummet for reasons that we'll get into in just a bit. And so you can see the state of relations where you can't even fly directly from one country to the other. And those suspicions have remained in spite of certain other key data points that we'll get into. On the other fronts, Soviet Union The Russian Revolution, the Soviet Revolution in 1917, also provided a lot of inspiration to Nehru and the Indian leaders. He wrote, he was, just as a slight aside, he was imprisoned by the British for 10 years. And in jail, while in prison, don't ask me how he wrote these books. He wrote a book of global history and a book on Indian history. Now, I don't have to remind you, the internet did not exist back then. I'm not sure where he got all the information from and how he managed to write these books. I've read both of them, and he expresses a great admiration for the Russian Revolution, even as, again, he did not agree with the methods. He was resolutely democratic. But at the same time, India and the Soviet Union built up defense ties. The United States, on the other hand, had more of a preference for Pakistan, because without reservation, they were willing to ally with the United States. John Foster Dulles, Eisenhower administration, goes to Pakistan and India, thinks India, Nehru not to be hardy and macho enough, thinks of the Pakistani military rulers to be much more to his liking, and Pakistan forms multiple alliances with the United States. CETO, CENTO, alphabet soup, we don't need to get into that. I just wanted to show that Pakistan was very close, which made India even more distant from the United States for much of the duration of the Cold War, despite the fact that Nehru, this was a blot on his democratic record, overthrew the first, I'm not making this up, the first democratically elected communist government in the world, even at the state level, was in South India. They came to power democratically, and Nehru engaged in machinations to overthrow them. So he was kind of ambivalent about the whole communist project, but at the same time, there were warmer relations with the Soviet Union than with the United States, which was more inclined historically toward Pakistan. What made things really bad, and this was slightly before even my time, but I heard about it through lore, through books I read and stuff. The worst relationship was between Richard Nixon and this lady, Indira Gandhi, who, I kid you not, was none other than Nehru's daughter. And so she was for 15 years in power, from the late 60s to 1984, off and on. She lost one election, came back. 1971, Pakistan has two wings. West Pakistan, East Pakistan, just like Alaska and the mainland United States. Only thing is, I know in Alaska there is a tiny pro-independence movement, but not very, very popular. In East Pakistan, on the other hand, there was a very popular movement to secede from West Pakistan for a variety of reasons. India, of course, sided with the independence movement. Pakistan started cracking down. The United States completely sided with Pakistan. Interestingly, because Pakistan was serving partly as an interlocutor between the United States and none other than China, to get Mao and Nixon to meet. And relations between India and the United States really badly degenerated during that time because of that. And the Soviet Union came to India's aid. So that was the low point in India-US relations back in the early 70s. But then things basically started improving over time. India did nuclear testing of nuclear weapons back in the mid-1970s. And then in the late 1990s, went openly nuclear. By that time, relations between India and the United States were so improved that the United States did not do very much at all to India. Very mild sanctions that were lifted within a short amount of time. The New York Times columnist William Safire had this theory even back then, that part of the reason was that even then, the United States was seeing India as a counterweight to China. Yeah. So that's why very mild kind of sanctions. And in 2000, I remember this. Bill Clinton goes to India and has a great time, and people in India love him. And he knows what to say. Also, remarkable. He had this. He made Indians so happy. He said, "In school, I was not a great math student, and I know now who I have to blame for all my math troubles. It's all these great ancient Indian mathematicians who gave, and everybody in India was like, oh, he's so awesome." So yeah, it was a very, very successful visit, which really helped warm India-US relations back in 2000. And then in 2005, under George Bush, despite India's nuclear program, the Bush administration and India signed a nuclear cooperation agreement, which is very unusual because nearly always if a country decides to go nuclear and have nuclear weapons, the attitude of the United States, except the 5 which have had it historically, China, US, Russia/Soviet Union, France, and England, has been one of generally of hostility. But again, the notion was becoming even stronger that India is needed as a counterweight to China. Obama, under him, there was a pivot to Asia, where they had this notion that we need to focus much more on Asia, and what in Asia? To contain China. So all of this is the backdrop. I would like to retreat a bit. Basically, let's get to the Biden administration, and then we can come. Let's stop here, retreat a bit, and then come back. So in recent years, India has been part of all these initiatives, and we'll get to some other ones. One is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which is this whole notion of connecting Europe to India economically through the Middle East. It's such a large, ambitious project. And to date, I have not seen, I follow all this, very much concrete work on the ground that would make this ambitious project a reality in the way it's envisioned to be, at least. I'm not saying that there's nothing happening. I'm saying there's not enough happening, at least as of yet. The other thing that India is trying to do is basically trying to be its real ambition in life, so to say, is to be a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. It's hugely, hugely prestigious. And plus, then you get to do things your way. The UN can't do anything without you agreeing to it because you have a veto power. And let's say this, that some reform is needed. Let's think about it this way. It's the way the UN is set up now, especially the Security Council, especially the permanent 5 members. It would be if we were using, or if they were using a setup during the time of the US Civil War to set up the UN in 1945. It's that unchanged. And so back then, 4 European powers, France, United Kingdom, USSR, which of course Russia has taken over the seat, and the United States, and one Global South member, China. That's it. So no African country, no Latin American country, no other country from Asia. And it's been that way. Not even Japan and Germany, because of course they were on the losing side in World War II. And ever since then, they've just not, have been given the opportunity. So that's certainly a very, very, I think, a commendable push in some ways. India's part of IPSA, India, Brazil, South Africa. So they formed an informal alliance to push each other's candidacy But as I tell my class, good luck to all of them with that. Since I just don't see anything happening. I've been seeing this loose coalition for the past many years, but that hasn't happened. To the non-aligned movement, which is in such a weird state that there's a scholar from the former who resides in the former Yugoslavia in Croatia says, I don't know whether to refer to it in the present tense or the past tense, because ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union especially. So the non-aligned movement does sort of exist, but the successor to that is this interesting new formation, sort of again of the global south, not maybe quite completely, called BRICS. I'm not making this up. So BRICS is from a term coined by a Goldman Sachs person. So he originally came up with that. It was just BRIC, and then S was added afterwards, and now there's some other countries in that. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And recently, some other countries have come onto that. So it's kind of a successor organization to that global south Bandung non-aligned movement, sort of, and not quite. And again, Russia being in it, of course, makes it even more complicated. Is it a global south country? I don't know. and then China has its own complications. India is in that grouping, but it's like, do we really want to be full in this? So all these countries have their own complicated dynamics, which is why it's not become quite a successor to the global south non-aligned movement the way it is. So India currently, I like to tell people, and this is, some of my relatives back in India, some of my friends may not be too happy with this. In the aggregate, the numbers are very impressive. After all, it has the largest population in the world. Whenever I go back to India, they keep on touting this fact and crowing about the fact that India is now the 5th largest economy in the world. I'm like, yeah, it has 1.4, 1.5 billion people too. So in the aggregate, it's very impressive. A lot more people have wealth now than they used to. When I went back to India as a child, there was almost no, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, a very tiny middle class. By the late 80s, it had expanded, and now it has further expanded by Western standards to about 100 to 150 million people. Another 200 to 300 million people are on the cusp, maybe. But a recent study found that 1 billion Indians have almost no purchasing power beyond the basics. It's not like they're living hand to mouth, but beyond that, they have almost no purchasing power. So that's the reality. Very unequal society, which is not that gratifying a sight to see. When you go, you see very opulent shopping malls, and shopping centers next to, slums in Mumbai, most gratingly, for example. So it's 170th in the world in per capita income, 134th on a better metric, which I prefer, which is the United Nations Development Programme's Human Development Index, HDI, which covers income, health, education. And to me, that's much more meaningful. Even on that, it's 134th. So you can see it has a long way to go. Problems, many problems. Pranab Bardhan, a scholar, comparative scholar who I've invited to come and speak in my class remotely. He's at Berkeley, a professor emeritus now, says, I tell my Indian friends that the reason that the Chinese are better capitalists now is that they were better socialists then. They took care, even under Mao's disasters by the late 70s, of healthcare, education, rural development, basic things, which nutrition, sanitation, all of which India neglected. So you can see why it's that unequal, the way it is now, basically. And again, unlike China, South Korea, Taiwan, it sort of leapfrogged from agriculture to services. Manufacturing was neglected. So, the working class, how do you build up their incomes? It's, as this country did, historically, it's on the basis of manufacturing. And so that became a problem. So that is why jobs are it's a jobs crisis in India. The youth unemployment is through the roof. One more reason why this may surprise you: the number of undocumented Indians in this country is almost the most of any country in the world. After Mexico, it's on par with El Salvador. Now, we've talked about this. Obviously, India has a lot of people, but last time I checked, it wasn't next door. It's very, very far away. So I have to delve deeper into this, that of these numbers of 725,000 Indians undocumented, are most of them overstaying their visas of one sort or the other? Increasingly, though, they are coming from the Mexican border, etc. Already, hundreds have been deported back home to India under the Trump administration, just in the last month or two. So that's the reality of India, and I just wanted to point that out, that there's a big discrepancy. As I said, if my relatives back in India listen to this, they won't be very happy with my assessment, but very big discrepancy between the perception of India as a large market and really growing, and the economy on paper is growing very fast. But again, much of the gains is being accrued by a relatively small portion of the population. So then we were at the Obama administration till 2016 or so, and then we come to the first Trump administration. Now, I'll get into this in just a bit in a bit further detail, but you see this picture of Narendra Modi. So it's Narendra Modi has been the Indian Prime Minister since 2014. As I said, if he's on his current trajectory, he'll be overtaking Nehru as the longest-serving Prime Minister, for better or for worse. He came back to power, though in a much diminished way, minority government. But he has coalition partners which got him past the winning post. But again, he is still in power. So this is during the first Trump administration, 2019 fall. They have a Howdy Modi event. I'm not making this up, in Texas. And all these Indian Americans who are his fans and that of the Trump of President Trump, they come out, and I have not seen an event in which a visiting head of state has so openly endorsed a sitting president as much as happened in this one back in 2019. And as you can see, they held hands and walked kind of, the length of the stadium. So Modi and Trump have had in the past, and we'll get into the difference this time, quite a warm relationship. This time, though, they met just a month ago, and I'll get into that in just a bit. India has also became under the Trump administration and slightly after, member of not one, but two Quads. And Quad as in four, of course. So one is the Pacific Quad, which is Japan, India, United States, and Australia. So that's one Quad. And the other one is a Middle Eastern Quad, which is more informal, which is Israel, India, UAE, United Arab Emirates, and the United States. 2 U's and 2 I's. That's how I remember. So it's become these groupings, and one of which, the Pacific Quad, it has been set up pretty much with the notion of containing China. And it is nearly completely a military alliance, although they have done other things, such as vaccine sharing. during during COVID, etc. So they've done other stuff too. So it's not like NATO. It's not just a military alliance and completely kind of like treaty bound. It's a bit more informal than that, but still. So Biden administration comes to power, and India starts showing its, in huge quotation marks, independence from the US. Russia, Ukraine, the Biden administration wasn't happy at all, because India was purchasing Russian oil on the cheap and then reselling much of it. They were like, hey, we need the money. Why do you blame us? And then Modi went both to Russia and to the Ukraine and met with Putin and Zelensky. So they're trying to sort of, have kind of, play it both ways, which wasn't appreciated. Yet the Biden administration did not say all that much. Again, China is the major looming adversary. And as long as India plays along on that front, Russia, fine, we don't like it, but still, that's we can sort of tolerate that. Also, I don't know if you know, there's a certain region of India called the Punjab, and people from that region are also in this country. Let's see, where do I have it? Yeah, it's in the northwest. You see, it's near the Pakistan border, and the majority of that state's folks belong to a certain religion called the Sikh religion, and they wear turbans, and that's the Golden Temple. In fact, I went to that just a couple of years ago for the first time. Some members of the Sikh diaspora have started calling. It's been for a long time in India and here for a separate country. India, I'm not making this up, has started targeting for assassination folks belonging to that mode of thinking, because they say they're violent and they are aiding and abetting, if not orchestrating, violent activities back home in India. So they actually killed somebody in Canada. And the charge is they tried to kill somebody here in the United States. So the Biden administration charged an Indian ex-official with orchestrating the killing. So that has also been a complication in the past. I'm not sure how the Trump administration will approach that. The other complication has been that one of Modi's bestie, BFF, his business ally is this guy called Gautam Adani, one of the richest men in Asia, if not the world. And he and another guy called Ambani are his real close buddies. He's been indicted by the Security Exchange Commission, the Department of Justice, for giving bribes to Indian officials. And because he's listed on the US stock market, that's why he was indicted. Now Trump has done away with, or is in the process of doing away with, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So how that will impact this, no one knows. It's something to be seen. So we then get to, of course, the current Trump administration. You can see a photo of let's see. Yeah, this is their meeting just a month ago or so. Very interesting, really fascinating, because all of it was dominated by tariffs and to a lesser extent by the issue of undocumented Indian immigrants. China barely came up, and telling India to purchase more jets, F-35 jets from the United States. So it was all very transactional, and the fact that Modi and Trump share a particular approach, get into that in just a bit, did not give India much leeway. In fact, an Indian reporter asked Trump that, don't you need our help in beating China? And Trump had an interesting response where he says, we aren't looking to beat China. So that shut up the Indian reporter. This may change, we know, but at the same time, as I said, very commercial and very much. If you don't reduce your tariffs, India has had historically high tariffs, much reduced from the time when I was a child. But still very high as compared to other countries. Trump is miffed by that. Harley Davidsons, for example, they've been putting tariffs on those. That's become a flashpoint even in the first Trump administration. No mention, as far as I could tell, of the assassination attempt or Modi's big business buddy being indicted. I'm not sure what will happen to that. Interesting postscript. Elon Musk has gotten a huge deal, Starlink deal in India, where he's teamed up with two of the other big business guys, just literally a few days ago announced. So that's where India-US ties stand. As for China, things were improving. Modi went to China, or the Xi Jinping came to India. Modi and Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, met a number of times over the years. Modi has been going to China since he was in charge of the state in Western India. Things were improving, and then in this portion of the India-China border, which is near Kashmir, clashes happened for complicated variety of reasons. You can see Galwan in the Galwan Valley. And if you see, it's such a long border. Yeah, so if you see, and much of it is taken up by Tibet. Yeah, so the western sector, the central sector, the eastern sector. Can you believe it? It's a long border between the two countries. And the reason it's not very well traversed as much of it is mountainous and stuff. My dad was very disappointed. He's no more, but he and my uncle and a family friend, they set out to see the China border. Of course, they couldn't cross it, and they almost went all the way, but the road was so bad that they had to turn back. Can you believe it? So he didn't get to see China, peer across and look into China. So things were improving over time, but in 2020, for a variety of complicated reasons, China took an aggressive posture. I think there's no denying that. Thankfully, there has been a long-standing agreement, before this at least, and I think it's still being upheld, that neither side will carry weapons at least as in guns. Despite that, and this sounds so gruesome, there were dozens of casualties because they literally beat each other to death. Yeah. So this was dozens of casualties in May 2020. Of course, relations go way, way down. And Modi is surprisingly sheepish. It's like, well, yeah, nothing happened, and nothing is happening, and nothing is going to happen. So it's kind of denial, because he knows, China is such a strong adversary, and you just don't want to take them on. So he's if it's Pakistan or some other country, he's like, yeah, we'll show them. But with China, it's a very different approach. So things really, really went downhill. Again, there's, as I said, not even a single flight between India and China. But recently, very recently, Modi and Xi Jinping met again. Some improvement, slight improvement, to the extent that you can see this photo, they're exchanging treats on the occasion of Diwali. you can just see the backdrop. It's so stark and so unpopulated, And so on Diwali is the major Indian festival, and so the Indian border guards are giving the Chinese border guards some treats on that occasion, literally a few months ago. But still, things are still uncertain, even though this may surprise you. India's largest trading partner is China. It just can't get away from that. And they try to break that dependence on primary products, on intermediate products, on finished products, but they just can't, despite the fact, for example, that they have banned TikTok in India. as my daughter was miffed to learn when she visited with my wife recently. so all of that, they're trying, so to speak, to diversify, but yet, so it's this weird situation where India and China are huge trading partners, but otherwise at odds. So that's that. We come to a very important kind of, and this is where I'll close, aspect of India and the United States in recent times that I just can't overlook, which is A, the diaspora, and B, a certain commitment to, let me tread carefully, to a certain religion-inflected nationalism in both countries. Let me put it that way. So let's start with the diaspora. Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. This came along with the Civil Rights Act of 1960, acts plural, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act of the mid-1960s, which was as key in changing this country, but is much, much less known. This actually allowed people from Africa and Asia especially to immigrate to this country. Before this, the quotas were absurd. They were like, I think it was like 1,000 Indians were allowed in or something per year. And after this, if you were skilled, if you had a professional degree, almost you were given a green card and permanent residency, almost immediately. I know this because my own father came in this way. In the early 1970s, he was a naval architect in Germany, West Germany, loved it there. Immigration laws, not so much. So when the United States opened it itself up, he came here, was here for 10, 12 years, then went back. So a huge wave of Indians come from then on. Basically, result is there are about 5 million Indians or so in this country. Modi belongs to they call themselves a Hindutva party, which means a Hindu nationalist party. I'm sorry if I'm prejudicing you against the party by bringing this up, but this is a fact. He belongs to a secretive, since he was 8 years old, he has belonged to an organization called the RSS, which used to wear these, I'm sorry, ridiculous looking shorts as the uniform, but now they've started wearing trousers. It is the fountainhead of the Hindu nationalist movement. And the party in power, BJP, is their political arm. Sad to say that the killer of Gandhi belonged to the same organization back in the 1940s. So you can see, they have a very strong Hindu nationalist kind of agenda. This, basically this majoritarian nationalism in some sense binds, although it's a different religion, we all know, in some sense, a strongman attitude. Populist, right-wing populism binds him to Trump and has in the past. This time he was given much less leeway. Indian Americans in this country are strong supporters generally of Modi. Hindu Americans, a poll some time back said 70% of them support Modi. A very recent poll, I'm glad I checked just before coming, has it down to 65%. So roughly the same numbers. There's a Hindu American Foundation which does very strong lobbying for Modi on Capitol Hill. And there is Kash Patel, who's of Indian origin, as the FBI director. Tulsi Gabbard is interesting in her own way, not of Indian origin at all. But her mother converted to Hinduism and has very strong ties with Modi's party. And she is, of course, the director of national intelligence. Will that strengthen ties between the United States and India? Maybe, maybe not. Vivek Ramaswamy, whose photo you see there, and who, of course, was in the Republican primary, was meant to be the co-head of DOGE, along with Elon Musk, but then made some comments about how Indian immigrants have a much stronger work ethos and that the population in general needs to learn from Indian immigrants. Coincidentally or not, he left DOGE shortly after to run for the Ohio governorship. I'm like, you didn't know that before? I mean, so anyway, so that's where things stand. We close where we started out, which is basically that India, as much as Modi and the BJP do not like this man, the legacy of non-alignment, the legacy of strategic autonomy that he gave, they can't completely get away from that. And because of that, because of India's size, India will never be satisfied with being just a kind of, like a camp follower of the United States. They will always try to have some distance from the United States, even if they aren't necessarily friends with or on the same wavelength as China. They will also always think themselves to be part of the global south, and since they're part of the global south, representing the interests of developing countries, again, they'll be at least a bit out of sync with the United States. So even though in recent years, India and the United States have been having a closer relationship, as I said, the legacy that Nehru has handed down, reluctantly, maybe, but Narendra Modi and the current dispensation are bound by that in some sense, and so cannot move away completely from that. And hence, the United States and India will and possibly will continue to have possibly. As I said, that meeting a month ago was, I think, disconcerting for the Indian leadership. Closer relations in time to come, but never ever will India and the United States be completely kind of, tied at the hip. And I end with that notion of strategic autonomy, and of course with that Chinese saying that may or may not be a Chinese saying, which is that we live in interesting times, and hence, if I'd given this presentation even some months ago, I would have had much more certainty in predicting where India and the US relations would go. No one knows, including folks in both these countries who are in charge. So thank you so much, and it's been such a pleasure and privilege to speak with you all about this.
All right. I do have someone helping me out tonight. Olivia will be helping me out. If you have a question, just raise your hand. Olivia will be on the left side of the room, facing Professor Pal. I will be on the right side of the room. So let's have at her. Anyone have a question? Oh.
I'm wondering.
Hold on. You know better.
I'm wondering about the caste system that has been part of the Indian culture and so on. Where is that now? Is that still a factor in the country, or?
That's such a large question that you've asked.
Yeah.
So the short answer is, officially, it's banned. You cannot discriminate on the basis of caste, officially. In fact, there is a strong affirmative action program for people belonging to disadvantaged castes in government universities, in public universities, and in government jobs. However, on the personal level, there's still a lot of that going on, and especially in village India, in rural India. In big places like Mumbai, Delhi, etc., it's much less of a factor. People don't know who's from what background, but in villages where people have lived for generations and there's not much mobility, they know for sure. And so there is that hierarchy, and often what reinforces it is that economics and caste are together. You see what I'm saying? So people from the dominant castes are often economically dominant, and people from the weaker castes are economically weaker. So that sort of basically makes that hierarchy even stronger. Things are changing. There's no doubt. Things are changing, but there's still a long way to go socially. And as I said, officially it's banned. You cannot discriminate against anybody on the basis of caste. Yeah.
Anyway, I'll yell.
Hold on. I know the rules also. Don't be like they're mean.
My understanding is that caste isn't necessarily an Indian thing, it's a Hindu thing.
Yes.
And so if Modi seems to be favoring Hindus over other versions of religions,
Islam, Christianity, etc. Yeah.
Right. So will his emphasis on sort of the Hinduization alter the attitude of the government?
That's such a great question. I'm so glad you asked that, because the movement he comes from is very much an upper caste movement. And it really wants to reinstate traditional Hinduism. On the other hand, it cannot say that it wants to reinstate the caste system. Modi himself is not from a dominant caste, but those people in that group in the background, the leaders of that are. And so you're right. That's one more fallout of that Hindu nationalist movement, that it is a reassertion of the dominance of upper castes within Hinduism. And a lot of scholars have pointed that out, no doubt. Yeah. Yeah.
I know you haven't talked, but it would be nice if you can talk about the Indian space program. Right. I know that India some years ago sent another spaceship, but satellites. It reached Mars actually.
Yeah.
You know, it broke down. It has some technical problem. But one of the things that I think is just embarrassing is that when the United States sent the men to the moon, they show, for example, in China, that 7 out of 10 Chinese didn't know that happened, and they showed that how the communist Chinese government were trying to hide as much as possible that 7 out of 10 Chinese. It's interesting that 8 out of 10 Americans don't know that the Chinese actually landed in the moon. And so in many ways it's worse in the United States, the ignorance of people that the Chinese landed in the moon. They have astronauts who landed in the moon, and most people in the United States don't know that, and much less people don't know about the Indian space program. And at the end, it's interesting how the United States is doing the same thing that Red China did or Mao did. You know? But if you can
actually, the Indian space program is very commendable. And one reason also is that it's very much homegrown. And it's been around since it started even further back. The first significant space achievement was the launching of a satellite when I was a child in the mid-1970s. So it's been basically active since then. And now, as you said, they've sent probes to the moon, to Mars, etc. And that's been, again, he was a geologist and scientist by training in his undergrad or by education. And he really, really laid the foundation for that, Nehru, back in the 50s and 60s, the Indian Space Research Organization, etc. And ever since then, for a country of India's means and economy, even though it's a large country, the achievements have been quite commendable, although they haven't yet, and there's a plan, they haven't yet sent men or people into space. Although one Indian, there've been Indian Americans who've gone, and one Indian did go along with the Soviets in the 1980s. I remember when I was a child, that happened. It was a huge deal. But no, it's certainly been really commendable that they've managed to achieve a lot over the past many decades.
The press here don't say much at all. It's just, for obvious reasons.
Anyone else? Go.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
So I most enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
So I don't fly among the elite of academicians, so I'm wondering what the people that you hang with think about the economic disruption going on as a result of the Trump administration. Is this purely so that things that we all in this room would believe would be unethical can occur with the Trump family and with Elon Musk cutting a deal just recently in India? Is this really stuff to make that threats of economic uncertainty in another place a viable negotiating tool for a member of the Trump family or somebody else? Are you having those conversations?
You've asked really the $64,000 question, haven't you? I mean, it's so hard to understand the real motivations, isn't it? And yeah, no, we've all been having those discussions, and you can attribute really ulterior motives, or you can think of it as part of kind of this larger sort of game plan to change the economy and to infuse efficiency and to bring manufacturing back home. It depends on who you speak with and who you believe as to what the motivations are, basically. But you're right. I mean, there is. I mean, a lot of folks think it's just Musk and these people positioning themselves for selfish gains. Yeah. So I guess we'll see how it all plays out. Isn't it amazing that it's just been barely, not even 2 months, yeah. since the inauguration this time? Yeah. So that to me is just disconcerting that so much has happened.
It's more amazing that the America that we all always knew will never be again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It happened that fast.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Professor Pal?
Yeah.
How is
Wait for the microphone, please, so that everyone can hear you.
How is the environment doing in India? We have many concerns here about withdrawing from the environmental talks, and how are you doing, or how is the country of India doing now?
So actually on renewable energy, etc., the Indian track record hasn't been bad. There's a lot of wind power that they're trying to tap into, a lot of solar energy. There's a lot of sun in India, but also coal, unfortunately, is also a mainstay. What is of concern environment-wise is air and water pollution. And that's a major, major concern. So New Delhi is always in the top 2 or 3 globally in terms of polluted air. The Ganges, I don't know if you saw photos of, there was a big gathering of maybe hundreds of millions of people, the Ganges and the Yamuna, where the confluence, the city called now Prayagraj, and they took a dip in the river there. And that river is, it's extremely polluted. So the pollution of waterways, the pollution of air, that's a major problem. And again, one other that the Modi government hasn't had any answers to, basically. So that's that degradation of the environment and pollution is a huge issue. Yeah, even though in terms of climate change, the Indian government has been trying to do its bit. Yeah.
Coming on your left.
Yes, I got the message. Is there any, I know that there's a big discrepancy between, the wealthy and the very poor.
Yeah.
But are there any safety nets to help people that are down at the bottom? Such as in the United States that we have.
Yeah, they have to have. Otherwise the Indian government won't survive. So during COVID, for example, they instituted, which is, I think, great if you have the resources, a program of subsidized to free rice and grain and wheat to people of modest means, not just the very poor. So the result is that I believe as many as 800 million Indians are receiving a certain amount, and I forget the exact number of kilograms, but certain amount of subsidized to free rice and wheat per month. Now, it's not a huge amount, but still. So there are those sort of programs in place, and then others for widow pensions, for example, or payouts to farmers who are poorer. So there are various programs in place, because otherwise they know that if they don't do that, the public's wrath will be upon them. So there are certain sort of, and not necessarily sufficient, but still they are there. And for example, there's the public healthcare system, the public health insurance. Yeah, but in practice, extremely imperfect. So during COVID, it just failed. Yeah, India had a really terrible time during COVID. And, the hospitals just couldn't cope. There was just not enough oxygen around, and people were just dying, just massive casualties. So again, there's a difference between the programs on paper and their implementation, but they certainly are there. Yeah.
I do have a question from someone who's following along online.
Yeah.
Anne wanted to know what type of deal did Musk make with the Indian company? Was it beyond Starlink, or was that the deal that had?
I believe it's just Starlink, as far as I know. I guess further details may emerge. Yeah, you never know. But no, from what I've read in the Times, it's just Starlink. Yeah, along with two really big figures in the Indian big business arena. Yeah.
Thank you. Could you explain how does the education system work in India?
In what sense?
As far as who goes to school, what's the higher education? Is everybody entitled to it, or do you have to pay for it?
Yeah. So if I had spoken to you all even some years ago, I would have expressed concern about a large portion of Indians who do not even get basic education. Thankfully, that has been remedied. So nearly all Indians are at least going through elementary and middle school at least. The quality of the government schools is often not very good. That's now an issue. But the issue is not at least early dropout. So that's there. In terms of college education, again, the same problem. A larger and larger portion of Indians, and I've seen those numbers expand tremendously, are going on to college. Many of those are government institutions, increasingly private. Quality of both, except a certain few. Again, we come back to him, and my father, and I guess me, owe our wherewithal to Nehru, because he set up these elite Indian institutes of technology, which are these global level engineering institutions from which and I think I'm right, a lot of Indian American tech stalwarts have graduated from those places. And if I'm not wrong, I think the current head of Google and the current head of Microsoft. So there are these elite institutions which are world class, and then below them, not so much. It's a huge issue. And in fact, again, because they are not producing quality graduates, they aren't able to get jobs. Nobody wants to hire them if you're not from one of the top ranking universities in engineering or MBA or medical. Yeah, so that's the issue now. The quality is an issue. Otherwise, government institutions over there are almost free. I remember paying something as absurdly low as in US dollars in purchasing power. It'd be something like paying, like $50 to $100 a year. That's it. So they're that cheap. On the other hand, private universities and colleges are expensive. Yeah.
I know this may be a very controversial subject, but has the government ever considered a population control program?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. One of my heroes, and let me bring that thing up. His name is Amartya Sen. He's 90 now. He got a Nobel Prize a few years ago. Actually, he's 91. He's from India. You know what he says? The best contraception is girls' education. And if a country focuses on that, and he says this is why China, the population, it wasn't coercion. It was basically that girls and women in that country became educated, and the government placed emphasis on that. In India, they didn't, which is one reason why the population was increasing till recently. That lady prime minister that I spoke about, Nehru's daughter, she did a disastrous measure in the mid-1970s. So she instituted a state of emergency, suspended democratic rights, and as part of that, because she and one of her sons thought India's population was expanding too rapidly, dragged people, young men generally, from the slums and got them forcibly sterilized.
That'd be a better way.
Yes. What happened is, after the restoration of democracy, people stopped visiting family planning clinics for years because they were so spooked. So it actually set back, effort. So they have lots of programs ever since, to encourage people to have smaller families. And as I said, over time, it's really, it's now two kids per family. Which is not much at all, and it's way down from when I was growing up. It was 5 or 6, so it has come down tremendously. Yes, unlike China, the population is still growing, and certainly as compared to the United States, which I find every time, especially Wisconsin, unless you live in New York or Chicago or LA, is very crowded. I'll certainly admit that, except certain portions maybe. But no, I think things are improving on that front, and I think they should have focused much more on female education, which they didn't. And so that's why they took these shortcuts, which actually ended up harming the family planning and population control issue more. The shortcut of just coercing people, dragging them from their homes and getting them forcibly sterilized. And this is interesting. I know I'm being facetious here. Why were they doing, can you all guess, for guys and not for women? Why was... Yes, exactly. It's easier. So there was, in some sense, a reverse discrimination going on. So it's much easier to do the quick operation, and they used to give them, I've heard, like a radio as a gift. They were like, okay, we get forcibly sterilized and we get a radio as a gift. So that, as I said, that backfired. They shouldn't have done that, yeah. And that was the reason. She ordered elections thinking she'd win, and that was one of the main reasons she lost. People are not too happy about getting forcibly sterilized.
Any other questions? If not, then we will bring the evening to its finish for this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
We have one lecture left for this year, and that is next week with Professor Martin Farrow, and it is on the future of American foreign policy. So another very uplifting, not gut-churning conversation.
The future of...
so much on policy.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Very nice.